get out our sawmill, pop everything. Does pretty good damage, but then you'll see the status effects. 8 million? Wait, what hit for 8 million? Did you you see that? Something hit for 8 million. Look, and then he'll just die to the status effects. Pop from the shadows, pop everything, get real close to him. And there he goes, and that's with the SMG, not even the liquid cooling. What's up guys, it's Nick2, and today I want to show you guys an updated FL4K 2.0 build that is still just as insane as ever and can completely tear through pretty much anything and everything, even on Chaos 35. This build has a ton of weapon options, which makes it fun and fresh to use, but on top of that, you don't actually need like insane gear for this build to work properly, because you're mainly just taking advantage of interactions that are going to exist within the classes themselves to be able to scale your damage really high. So having perfect gear is of course going to help, but it isn't at all mandatory for making this build really strong. Not much else to say other than the build is absolutely wild, and there's also another version of it that I'm working on that's even better, but it is going to be a bit different, so I plan to save that for a separate video. But feel free to drop a like and subscribe to let me know that you guys are interested in seeing that version of it. Regardless though, let's just get into it. As always, there's going to be some extra Chaos 35 now gameplay at the end of the video, as well as the save file is going to be available in my Discord if you guys are interested in seeing it. So getting into the build itself, how it's actually going to function, I've covered this in my previous video, but I do want to rehash it. There is two versions of this build. One version is going to be taking advantage of the Stabbomancer capstone trait, which is Executioner's Blade, where gun and spell crits have a chance to create an ethereal blade. The ethereal blade is going to deal melee damage based on whatever your equipped melee weapon is. This is going to have no internal cooldown, and it's going to scale off of whatever your melee weapon is. We are then going to use a spell blade, which is then going to do spell and melee damage. Pair that with Spellshot. This is going to enable our Executioner's Blade to do an insane amount of damage, because the spell blade is going to pull from both spell damage and melee damage. Pair this with a Warped Paradigm. We're increasing our melee damage by our spell damage, so we're getting a whole bunch of spell damage stacked up. And then we're using a very high rate of fire weapon in the form of liquid cooling, or a cryo SMG, or a Queen's Cry taser, whatever you want. That's then going to proc a whole bunch of crits back to back to back, which is then going to scale Executioner's Blade, have this happen over and over and over again. And then with Executioner's Blade and Alchemical Agent dealing melee damage and melee critical hits, this is then going to apply a random status effect, which is then going to do a whole bunch of damage because we have a whole bunch of extra status effect damage, but also it's going to scale Exploit Their Weakness. Hopefully you guys understand all that. There's a few moving pieces, but once you understand exactly what's happening, it's pretty simple. The other version of this build, which I made a video on initially, was, and I'll leave a link to that video in the description, which you can still very easily do. That video, or that setup, is still incredibly good. It's just raw gun damage. It's just not going to have as much bossing potential, but overall for mobbing, that build is insanely strong, and it's just all about your gun. So you don't have to do anything in terms of like getting a spell blade or getting a warped paradigm or whatever, because you're not going to be using Executioner's Blade. All you do for that build is pretty much go down to one slot, one kill, get as much gun damage as possible, and then you put like, I believe I put 3 points into 1,000 cuts, and I didn't go for Sever the Thread, and then you just go for full gun damage, and you use a smart armor instead. That's pretty much the gist of that build. But for this video, I'm going to be covering the Spellblade version, because I do think that that's overall stronger, and that's what's going to enable us to kill the raid bosses like insanely quickly, which is usually what I like optimizing my builds around. So getting into everything, I want to give a better explanation for things so you guys know exactly how it works, in case my quick synopsis wasn't fully understandable. In terms of our hero stats, we want to go full crit damage and then full status damage. Status damage is really, really good for this build. And then the crit damage, of course, we're going to be in From the Shadows a lot, so getting that extra crit damage is mandatory pretty much. For the next thing, you could either go spell cooldown if you want more activity, or sorry, uptime for like your Buffmeister. I went for skill cooldown so that I had more uptime on From the Shadows, because we do a whole bunch of damage while we're in From the Shadows. For a skill tree, like I mentioned, you want to go 3 points into Magic Bullets just for the extra gun damage there. You want to get some reload speed, some fire rate with just warming up, a little bit of spell and actual cooldown rate with Font of Mana is pretty good. Glass Cannon, of course, for the extra spell damage, but if you want more survivability, you could just take this out and then go for Mage Armor. However, this is going to reduce your overall damage output, because we're going to be using Cursed Wit, where whenever our ward is low, we gain increased damage, so Glass Cannon pairs perfectly with that, but you literally don't need all the extra damage from Cursed Wit. The damage is so insane with this build that you actually just do not need that, but I like to do it because I want to kill stuff as fast as possible. Then we go high thread count for the extra spell waving sacks, which is going to give us extra spell damage. For the Stabbo tree, this is mainly what's important. You just want 5 points in Arsenal, which is melee, spell, and gun damage, which is pretty insane. 5 points into Potent Poison for status effect damage. Exploit Their Weakness, which is very good. It's going to give you 6% extra damage per unique status effect, and we're going to be proccing all of the status effects via Alchemical Agent, so this is a whole bunch of extra damage, and it's on its own separate modifier. I put 1 point into Swift Death. Previously, I was putting 5 points into Sneak Attack, but I feel like Swift Death just has to be better, at least putting 1 point into it to just get the separate modifier. I don't really know. I don't even know if it works with Executioner's Blade. A lot of these things are like impossible to test. I'd recommend doing it just because, just see what happens, but probably not noticeable. Then I have 3 points into Nimble Fingers. This is insane. Fire rate and spell damage pretty much all the time. Sneak Attack for the crit. 1,000 cuts is just flat out extra damage, and then obviously we're capstoning Executioner's Blade. The best way to take advantage of Executioner's Blade, because it's going to proc off of gun and spell critical hits, is using any weapon that is going to hit multiple times simultaneously or hit a lot of times, because it has a chance to proc per hit the enemy takes, right? So ideally what you want to use is, I find the liquid cooling to be the best for raid bosses because the fire rate is incredibly high and it's shooting multiple projectiles, so this thing just shoots really fast. You don't have to ever reload, and when you're in From the Shadows, you're just going to be shooting constantly. It's really, really good. It does tear through ammo. Other options are using the Queen's Cry with the taser effect. You shoot the taser down and the taser will proc a whole bunch. The taser just does very little damage, which is why I don't like using it. Alternatively, things like Fear Not shotguns are going to have times 10 pellets, so they're going to hit multiple times, and that's going to be pretty good. Or you could use a Cryo SMG. These do a whole bunch of damage regardless. Anyone that's like times 4 or times 5, that's going to be really good. The Sawmill is actually pretty good for this. It's going to tear through ammo, but the damage that it does is actually quite insane. So I would highly recommend checking this out. I made a video talking about all the best weapons, so feel free to check that video out. I'll leave a link to it in the description, but these are all of the ones that I'd recommend. If you're using the other version of the build, using a Queen's Cry is going to be really good, and Auto Magic is pretty good. Like I mentioned, the Sawmill. All of those are pretty good options and what I think are the best, but ultimately I like using the liquid cooling. For the other weapons that I have equipped, I have a Twisted Delusion, made a separate video on this as well. We're using it pretty much to take advantage of the soaked effect, so anytime I fight a raid boss, you probably see me whip this out, shoot the enemy with it. They're now going to take 50% extra damage, which is kind of insane when you think about it. And then I'm going to be using a Masterwork Handbow. This is literally just so that I can swap to it and get my spell whipping stacks up, because it has the fastest reload in the game. You don't really need it, I just like to use it because, especially with the liquid cooling, not actually reloading, it's nice to have this. Of course, for the weapon, we're using the the melee. We're using a Spellblade. Spellblade is going to make your melee attacks pull from spell damage as well as melee damage, so absolutely insane. Highly recommend getting Echo. I don't even know if Echo is going to work with Executioner's Blade. It's kind of hard to test that. I imagine it probably does, which is probably why this build is so crazy. If you could, you probably want to get crit damage and melee damage. I believe this could even be a better roll here, but regardless, I was lucky enough to get this on Primordial, and I think it's the only Primordial. I think I have that. Yeah, I have that in my class item as Primordial, and everything else is pretty much what I was using from my previous video. So this is really, really good. And this is pretty much the only thing that you need for this build to work, is just get a Spellblade, get like a weapon that shoots a lot of, or does a lot of hits at the same time, and your damage is already going to be crazy. In terms of the spell, to be able to take full advantage of this, we're using a Buffmeister with Bonk and Zap. Bonk is going to give us 80% extra melee damage, and Zap is going to give us the same in spell damage. This is really, really good. And of course, we're getting extra movement speed, and it's just a whole bunch of extra damage there. I'm using a Cryo one, but you can use whatever element you want. Also, my Spellblade is Cryo. I recommend building all into one element, so if you want to use a shock weapon, try to get a Spellblade that's shock and try to do everything into one element, because that'll just give you the biggest returns, but you don't actually have to do that. That's just optimal. So same thing with like the neck, for example. If you're doing a full lightning build, you would want to have lightning damage here. I have frost damage and Spellshot power. I'd recommend getting a Thurge, because this is just going to give you additional action cooldown rate whenever you pop your spell, whenever From the Shadows is on cooldown. You can get higher all damage dealt here. This is what I would recommend. There's some other options, like whenever you deal melee damage, you have a chance to automatically reload your weapon. That's pretty good. The problem is that it can only roll gun damage in Spellshot power, and frost damage is going to be much better than the gun damage there. But also, if you're using like the liquid cooling, you don't need that automatic reload. For the class item, for the shield, we're using a Cursed Wit here. This is overall just going to give you a whole bunch of extra damage. If you want more survivability, you could put on a Bad Egg, and then you'll get extra movement speed and melee damage from that, and that's pretty good, but Cursed Wit overall is going to give you the most damage. For your rings, you want spell damage, because spell damage is going to be the highest thing that you could get. Alternatively, melee damage wouldn't be bad, but spell damage is ultimately going to be best, because we are taking advantage of it twice by using a Warp Paradigm. So not only is the Spellblade going to pull from spell damage, but we're also converting some of that pre-existing spell damage into even more melee damage, so it ends up getting really, really good there. I just have two of the same ones, melee crit damage and action skill cooldown rate. Probably the best roll that you could get here, because action skill cooldown rate is actually really, really good for reducing the cooldown on your From the Shadows. You want it to be a mood ring, because that's going to increase the effects by 100%. It's overall really strong. For our class item, mine's Primordial, pretty lucky, but the rolls here aren't great. You want to have high thread count. I believe there's another version of this that I want to test with Double Knot, but I don't know if Double Knot actually worked with Executioner's Blade. Feel Feel free to look out for a double knot class item though. Ultimately, you just want it to be a warped paradigm so that you get the increased melee damage from your spell damage, and then you want it to roll spell damage, or you could get it to roll with melee or all damage dealt. Those would all be pretty good options here. This could also roll with fire rate instead of the prestidigitation, which would be good, but unfortunately this is just what I have. And I have gun crit, which is useless. The movement speed, actually, I really like, because by default, you run really, really fast. That's pretty much it for the build. If you guys are still watching, please make sure to drop a like. Thank you. In terms of the enchants, I'm using on action skill start, increase spell damage by 40%, while action skills active, increase frost damage, gain 30% melee damage flat against bosses and badasses, and then on action skill start, increase damage up by 20%. Alternatively, you could get the on action skill or active, increase elemental damage by 35%, or you could get on action skill start, increase melee damage. The setup that I have, I think, is pretty ideal. I enjoy it, and I think that it's the most damage and is the most consistent. Of course, action skill active enchants are not going to be active all the time now, but it doesn't really matter for this build because the majority of our damage is going to be within our From the Shadows window anyways, and while we're in From the Shadows, our action skill is active, so this build is pretty much unaffected by that nerf. Other than when we're not in From the Shadows, our damage will be a little bit less, but that's why I like having the 20% here for 20 seconds, and the, on action skill start stuff is going to be really, really good for this. Also, the flat 30% is active all the time, which is why I swapped to that from the 35% elemental. Alright, now I just want to show you guys some gameplay. I'm going to do the extended run and show you guys some raid bosses, etc. with the build, just to show you how good it is. Alright, so as you can see, the gameplay is on intense, and I'm going to do the featured run extended, because I want to be able to do all the raid bosses for you guys. So I'm just going to run in here. I just want to show you gameplay that, it's good by default. You don't have to do anything insane. You can just run in and do a whole bunch of damage automatically. Usually for mobbing, I like to use the Fear Not Pixies just because it's faster. It's not really fun to use, but they're just going to absolutely tear through everything. The thing about this build is that it's not as good for mobbing because the damage takes like a second to ramp up. Like, I can get a few crits, and then the Executioner's Blade and stuff will just absolutely tear through everything once it's procced. So ultimately, this build ends up being a bit better for bosses rather than mobbing. It's still, of course, good for mobbing. It's just not like as good as it used to be, I guess you could say, because the action skill stuff isn't always going to be active. And the pixies usually just do a whole bunch of damage by default, so I kind of like using those for mobbing, because you just throw them out and they're just going to fly around and kill everything. But as you can see, even on Chaos 35 and on Intense, and under not ideal circumstances, we can still just look at things and kill them pretty quickly. This run is probably going to take quite a while because it's an extended one for whatever reason. They decided to do that. I want to show you guys the pixies actually. Just I don't remember how good the shotgun one is. Oh, it's pretty good. Why is my game lagging? Anyway, you can see that these do a whole bunch of damage, and they're pretty good for mobbing because you can just throw them out and then they'll kind of just kill everything. Certainly not as much fun as just using whatever weapon you like using, but it is certainly faster if you're trying to just clear stuff really quickly. The liquid cooling is mainly just for bossing. I'm just going to show you guys the pixie again here because this floor is particularly good for it. I throw some out and then pop my From the Shadows. I'm going to edit the most of this gameplay because honestly these runs are insanely long, and I kind of just want to show you guys the bosses. I don't really want to show a whole bunch of this. I mean, I think you guys get the gist. The build can do pretty good damage pretty much no matter what you're doing. Oh my god, calm down, dude. And like I said, this build is mainly for killing the bosses, so the fact that we can kill mobs this quickly without like getting Executioner's Blade to even proc at all is pretty good. Another one of these floors is kind of fun to watch. I edited out the other ones because they were kind of just boring. The extra mob density is actually pretty nice. Just want to show you guys this one, and then I'll probably just straight up cut to the raid bosses. I wanted to at least mention that that's what's going to happen so that you don't just, oh, I'm at the raid bosses. But yeah, the build is insane pretty much no matter what you're doing. Where are you going? Freezicles, come on, man. We're trying to get through this, dude. I'm just going to stand here. Pixies OP. Alright, we're on the first boss now. Volcanar. This guy's not super fun, but I just want to show you guys at least the first phase of it because you can just kill him extremely quickly, which I guess, it's pretty nice. Yeah, as you can see, goodbye. It takes a second. You do a little bit of damage and that's kind of how the build works. Alright, well, this run bugged, I guess. I'm just stuck here, and I've been here for a few minutes, so I have to do the run again. Please drop a like if you're still here to feed my pain. Alright, we're finally back to the raid bosses. My mic was muted, and I actually noticed it looking at my other monitor when I walked up to Barkenstein, so that's why his health is half HP. But it doesn't really matter. Right here, I want to show you guys a little trick that you can do. So if you're using the Queen's Cry, you can pop out the taser. You can shoot the taser preemptively, and then you can swap to like whatever other weapon that you're using, and the taser will do damage passively while also doing damage with your other weapon, which is pretty good. Ultimately, like I mentioned, I didn't even apply soaked here, which I guess I would have done more damage with. Ultimately, the liquid cooling is going to be better than like the SMG or whatever, using liquid cooling, but I have like no ammo for whatever reason, because I guess I was using pistol pixies, so I figure I'll just use the SMG for this just to show you guys. But as you saw in the intro gameplay, you can use pretty much anything, but I just want to use the I'll use SMG right here just for fun. Just to show you guys you can use all kinds of different stuff. So we're gonna apply soak to him. As you can see, he has soak now. Pop from the shadows, pop everything, get real close to him, and there he goes. And that's what the SMG, not even the liquid cooling. I've yet to use this build against the Maker, so I'm actually curious how good it'll do. Oh, I forgot this boss exists. I actually want to use Sawmill against this boss just to see how good that is. So we'll apply soaked. I got to be careful not to die here. Get out our Sawmill, pop everything. Does pretty good damage, but then you'll see the status effects. 8 million. Wait, what hit for 8 million? Did you see that? Something hit for 8 million. Look, and then he'll just die to the status effects. That's kind of insane, dude. 8 million? I don't even know what hit for that hard. Alright, so I'll swap to the liquid cooling, and I'll do the little Queen's Cry trick on the Maker. See how fast we can get her down. Her? It? Tina? Who knows? So I want to try shooting... I'll shoot 2 tasers, I guess. I don't even know if they stick against the ground. I don't know what's going on there. Alright, hopefully they stay. And then we'll pop the soaked. And then we'll do everything else. We got our liquid cooling out. See if we can melt her. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I think if we fight her faster, we could do more damage. But I mean, that's pretty strong if considering it's the Maker on 35, cast 35. As you can see, I'm kind of tearing through ammo. I think if I started earlier and just did the liquid cooling, it might have actually been better. But as you can see, she dies fairly quickly. I don't know what's going on with this last bit of health. She seems to have a lot of damage reduction, and I am now out of ammo. Can I rocket her to death? Oh my god. What is happening, man? No, am I gonna run out of ammo? Oh, that is a terrible display. I'm pretty sure if I didn't do the taser thing and if I just kept her soaked and just immediately hit her, because I think she gets some damage reduction. I think if you just fight her before she gets all the damage reduction stuff, you can just kill her instantly. And probably if I was doing this normally, if I wasn't trying to show off with the Queen's Cry, I'd probably just have the SMG out. Because the SMG, if you run out of ammo with the pistol or whatever, it's just going to be secondary, or it's going to be its own ammo, so it'll do a whole bunch of damage. Yeah, that was a terrible representation of the build. Sorry for that. I probably didn't have max spell weaving stacks. As you can see, I didn't really get anything good with with my extra skills. I only got 1,000 cuts and some reload speed and a little bit of crit damage. I was actually really bad with the extra stuff that I got from the skills there. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. Sorry for the terrible Maker gameplay. But I'm sure you guys aren't aware that the build is good enough regardless. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later. Have a good one. Updated version of this, I guess with like double knot and pixies and stuff, will be uploaded in a bit. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Oh, Skeet Prod is also a good weapon. Kind of completely forgot about that one. That one's also pretty good. Alright, see you guys.